We've been looking at the 600 block of Water Street on the south side, and I told you when we finished up the last video that the only store left was the corner store that was on the southeast corner of 7th and Water. There's one other store I want you to take a look at. We don't even have a picture of it, but I thought it was interesting the fact that the store was even there, and that's Dawn Donuts. When we think of Dawn Donuts, we think of this place right here that was on 24th Street. But in the late 1920s, early 1930s, Dawn Donuts was on Water Street. And I come to realize after doing some research that Dawn Donuts has been around a long time, all the way back to about 1920. Back then they had delivery trucks, as you can see from these two photographs. Not only trucks, but also cars as well. You can see 3 delivery cars here with Dawn Donuts on the side of them. And this isn't, of course, the Fort Huron store, but it gives you an idea of what it was like back then. Prior to 1920, Dawn is originally founded as a Century Bakery in Jackson, Michigan by Eugene Warden and Grover Lutz. They chose the name Dawn because of the time of day bakers do their work. Dawn's donut recipes soon became so successful that Mr. Warden and Mr. Lutz bought a bigger building and installed equipment for mixing and packaging. They then formed the Dawn Donut Company, the nation's first industrial bakery mix company. And today, Dawn Foods is still headquartered in Jackson, Michigan. I believe Dawn Donuts came to Port Huron shortly after the new company was formed. They're in the 1924 city directory, and this ad was also in the directory. But at that time, they weren't on Water Street. They were at a place called Custom Place. Well, come to find out, Custom Place only had a couple businesses on it, and really it was Custom Alley. And it must have been behind one of the larger stores on Military Street, or possibly even toward the back of Stevens on Water Street. But that's where they started out, it appears. So I thought that was kind of an interesting tidbit, and I wanted to share that with you. All right, let's go down to the end of the block, the southeast corner of 7th and Water Street. See what there is there. This photograph doesn't actually show the store that was on the corner. That would have been just west of the bakery. But we do have a couple pictures. One is very old. This is the picture I'm referring to that was taken probably back in the late 1800s. Here's a much better picture, and this is Amelia Fish's grocery store. And as far as I know, as far back as my research goes, it was always a grocery store in that corner. So let's take a look at Mr. Fish's grocery store. As we zoom in here at the very top, we can see a very large advertisement for Court Royal cigars, which I'm sure was paid for by Court Royal Cigars. I wasn't real sure of the word court. It's not real clear, so I did some research on it, and of course there is a Court Royal cigar, as you can see from this can that held those cigars. All right, as we drop down here, we see some more signage. Signage in the center says Fish's Cash Grocery. On each end it says meats. It wasn't unusual for local grocery stores to run a tab for their good customers, and they would pay when they got their check at the end of the week. But Mr. Fish is saying, hey, I'm not having any of that, cash on the barrelhead. Can't see much at the very bottom. It's pretty dark because of the awning. But to the left, you can see that it looks like they built a little addition there in between the two stores. And you see some signage in the windows advertising. Who knows what they're advertising? One looks like an upcoming event, maybe the 14th of some month, perhaps a circus. You can see by this advertisement it wasn't just a grocery store, it was more like a general store, because they had all kinds of things there: boots, shoes, clothing, medicines. One of the things that kind of fascinated me were these 2 items on the bottom: authorized agents for Dr. Christie's Galvanic Curatives and Moorhead's Magnetic Plaster. So I looked into these two things. This Dr. Christie's galvanic belt magnetic fluid. I mean, if you had a problem, it would cure it. Look at the things it takes care of. Strengthening the weakened body, giving tone to the various organs, invigorating the entire system. You have fits, cramps, paralysis, palsies, indigestion, rheumatism, deafness, epilepsy, gout, nervous tremors, palpitations of the heart, pains on the side, pains in the chest, liver complaints, spinal complaints, hip complaints, diseases of the kidneys, everything. This stuff must be good. And Mr. Moorhead's magnetic plaster, well, I'm not sure what this cured, but we do know that it was a yellow grease that could be spread on a wrapping, and I guess the wrapping was provided. And you can see it here. I think this was on sale at eBay at one time. You have the little tin that kept the yellow grease in, and then the little wrapping there that you put around whatever you had to put around it. I don't know what it did, but obviously people were buying it. This stuff was first produced around 1849 and stopped being produced, at least by this company, in 1868. So it gives you an idea when that photograph was taken of the store. Here's a great picture of Mr. Fish's store with Mr. Fish standing in the front. The caption says, "The Fish Cheap Grocery on Water Street, promoted cash and carry." Here we see Fish and his clerk, Susan Lahey. And once again, we see Mr. Fish wants cash on the spot. You can see from the signage, spot cash. Something tells me he got burned with credit at one time or another. Going back to this photograph here, the store on the left, this is where Porter Bakery was in our last video. That's the Havey Market, which was owned by James Havey. It was a meat market. He was a butcher. And later on, he would take over Fish's store, which is just one store down to the west. And that would become his store. And not only meat market, although that's what it shows in the directory, but according to this photograph here, it looked a lot like he was carrying a lot of other things in the way of a grocery line as well. James Havey sold out to Smith Brothers grocery store, and not to be confused with H.A. Smith. And Smith was there for a few years, and then it had a disastrous fire that burned the whole building down, as you can see from this photograph and the next photograph we'll be looking at. In this photograph, you can see the aftermath. And you can look at that second floor. Most of the buildings along here in the 600 block had apartments on the second floor. In many cases, the owner themselves lived in the apartments, or in some cases, the manager of the store would live up there. All right, I think that finishes the 600 block. We'll just walk around the corner here on 7th Street. Today, that corner looks like this. That's Water Street on the left and 7th Street on your right. The building that sits back off this corner is the Eastern Michigan Bank. The businesses in this block are few and far between, but there was a time there was quite a few businesses and they were pretty close together. This block used to look like this though. The store I remembered the most in this block was Kimball appliance store. The store I don't remember is the store just to the left of Kimball appliance store, and it took me a while to find out what store this was. All I had to go on was, it looked like the word where and the word ux. I figured out it must be hardware and perhaps trucks at the top. And I think I was right. This building was owned by Kimball as well. C.H. Kimball. This would have been in the late 1800s. And of course you can see the main form of transportation then was horses. And as you can see, he sold hay and feed for the horses, as well as feed for other things, I'm sure. And some other things there you see as well, like the flour and the straw, the salt. A little later on, he expanded his business. And he makes a very bold claim in the very first sentence here. Kimball's make 'em lay. Well, maybe, maybe not. But you can see they had the same things they had before, but they also expanded to auto tires and tubes, international farm machinery, John Deere line of implements, and American seeding machines, as well as garden tools. You can see by this advertisement that the business is no longer being run by C.H. Kimball, but by his son, Harvey Kimball. I found this in the 1924 city directory, and you can see pretty much the things we've been looking at, but now he's added international motor trucks. And so that was part of the truck signage that we saw in the building that we wondered about, or at least I wondered about. Another interesting thing about this photograph, it shows the gasoline pump out in front of his store. You have to realize, and we covered this in a previous video, but before gas stations, the merchants would just put their gas pumps out in front of the store, and they would fill the cars there. This photograph gives you a little better idea of the gas pumps being on the sidewalk. This isn't Port Huron, but you get a little closer look here. Going back to Kimball Appliance, originally this was called Kimball Radio Studio. Of course, before television, radio was the big thing. If you ever watched the Walton TV program, you can see how the family always gathered around the radio for not only entertainment and listening to music, but also for the news of the day. Another major item that they sold was the Frigidaire refrigerator. But of course, just like the television set, at first only the wealthy could afford them. Most people had the original ice boxes that they dealt with every day and had to put the ice in and drain the water from the pan below. I was amazed by how similar the first refrigerator that Frigidaire put out looked like an ice box. You can see the comparison side by side here. As the prices came down, the refrigerators sold very well, especially after the war, because during the war it was very difficult to get one. And this photograph gives you a good picture of the pickup that they were making from the train that day. Eventually, Frigidaire had competition, but people still referred to the refrigerator, no matter what the brand, as a Frigidaire, or short, fridge. Most people think the word fridge comes from refrigerator, but if you notice, the word refrigerator doesn't have a D in it, and the word Frigidaire does. A lot of people still refer as tissues, me being one of them, as Kleenex. That's a brand name. And that was the same way with Frigidaire. Kimball Appliance is still in business today. They're now located on the northeast corner of 10th Street and Lapeer Avenue. This year they are celebrating 90 years in the appliance business. And as a retailer, going all the way back to C.H. Kimball, it goes much farther back than 1927. So the Kimballs have had a very rich history in this city. As we move down the street, we can see some signage hanging over the building, and it says O.G. Pringles, which was a prominent cleaners in Port Huron. And right here we can see an ad for that cleaners as well. Keep them new. Do not permit your garments and choice rugs and curtains to become old. From the O.G. Pringles cleaner down for the end of the block, it was mostly residential. I knew that Arthur Smith had his first funeral home in this block, but I wasn't real sure of the location. But with the help of Ed Borowski, he was able to pinpoint that location for me. And as we zoom in down here, you'll see that large home just beyond the cleaners. And that was Art Smith's first funeral home. Mr. Borowski also sent me some photographs concerning Arthur Smith Funeral Home, and some of them are quite unique. I'll share a couple of those with you right now, and then I'll share the rest of them when we get to the funeral home that most of us remember Arthur Smith being at, and that's on 7th Street and Union on the northeast corner. Of course, when Mr. Smith started the funeral home, they didn't have motorized funeral hearses. They had funeral coaches like this one right here. This coach belonged to Smith Funeral Home, and you can see it's just been recently painted. This is Arthur E. Smith sitting at his desk at the funeral home. And this little fellow right here is his son, Arthur B. This photograph was taken on Pine Street in front of a very familiar landmark, at least back then it was, and that's Troy Laundry. Mr. Borowski shared these photographs with me with the permission of Arthur Smith, and it's much appreciated. Well, that pretty well finishes up the east side of 7th Street in this block. Well, it's actually one block on the east side, but there's 2 blocks on the west side because Howard intersects there. But in our next video, we'll look at the west side and see what there is there.